I count in my sleep now. 10, 9, 8. The rhythm doesn't stop when the guns go quiet. It follows me even here, in the Medicaid ward 3 decks down, where the void-facing bulkheads feel like they're leaning inward, and the air is always too cold or too stale. I whisper the numbers without meaning to. The nurses think it's trauma. They're not wrong. When you've spent 6 years loading macro cannon shells aboard the Eternal Dominion, a dictator-class cruiser assigned to the Segmentum Obscurus, certain things get welded into you. The countdown is 1. The ringing in your ears is another. The tremor in your hands when they're empty is the 3rd. I tell myself I'm writing because the administratum asked for a statement. Some logistics audit, some efficiency review. They want rates and losses and consumption curves. How fast we fed the guns, how long crews lasted, how much ammunition vanished into the void. That's part of it. The rest is simpler and worse. I need someone to understand what life looks like down on the gun decks, where the Emperor's wrath is assembled 1 shell at a time, where boys become loaders, and loaders become something else, where Mikhail went, where Jens went, where, eventually, we all go. Before I was pressed into naval service out of Hive Terte on Scintilla, I'd seen the propaganda reels, polished brass, heroic crews, clean uniforms, triumphant music as gunners fired shining weapons into the darkness. You'd think a macro cannon deck is a cathedral of war. In reality, it's a tunnel. A long, narrow passage of ceramite and adamantium that runs like a throat through the ship. Hot enough to make your thoughts swim. Loud enough to set your teeth aching. The air so thick with gun oil and propellant residue it tastes like chewing a low-stick filter soaked in promethium. Our station was Battery Deck 17. Starboard, primary macro cannon assemblies 4 through 8, stretching the length of 3 hab blocks. 5 guns. Each one able to throw a shell the size of a Chimera transport across void space hard enough to crack armor plating. Each gun demanded a crew. Each crew demanded loaders. And loaders, we learned quickly, were the cheapest part of the equation. I wasn't a name down there at first. I was a role. Loader 3. That's what they called you. Function and position. Loader 1 worked closest to the breech and the locking mechanisms. Loader 2 handled alignment and cradle adjustment. Loader 3, my slot, hauled shells from the magazine feed to the loading cradle. Loader 4 existed on paper and in prayers. We had 4 loaders when I arrived. Most days we ran 3, sometimes 2. Once, burned into memory. Gun assembly. 5 fought an entire engagement with a single loader. The master of gunnery pinned a commendation to the man's jumpsuit like it meant anything. He was dead 3 days later. The Medicaid log called it catastrophic systemic failure, as if his body had simply decided to resign. They warn you about enemy fire. They warn you about boarding actions and hull breaches and warp madness. They don't warn you that the work itself is built to destroy you, methodical, efficient, complete. Like a machine designed to turn scrap into nothing. Officially, we ran 12-hour shifts. In combat, shift became a word for people who lived above us. We worked until the engagement ended, or until we collapsed, whichever came first. A macro cannon shell is roughly 140 kilos, reinforced casing, penetrator core, packed charge, about 2 meters long, with welded grips that bite through gloves and into your palms. On a perfect cycle, a gun could fire every 45 seconds. 5 guns meant a constant overlap of motion, lifting, carrying, aligning, locking, clearing, again and again, until your mind had no space left for anything except the next load. Lift, carry, align, load, clear. Repeat. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire. That countdown is the spine of everything. The gun captain called it before every shot, part timing, part warning. 10 seconds from his first word to discharge. 10 seconds to get the shell seated, the breech sealed, your body out of the recoil lane that would pulp you if you were still inside it when the mechanism kicked back. 10 seconds that somehow feel endless and instant at the same time. I learned the count on my first day. Orientation, if you can call it that, standing with 6 other new loaders in the assembly bay while gun Captain Horvath studied us like inventory. He was 31 and looked twice that. His hands were wrapped in scar tissue so thick his fingers no longer bent correctly. When he spoke, his voice rasped like metal dragged over stone. Later I learned why. The fumes, they scar everything soft. Lungs, throat, the inside of your mouth. The ship doesn't just take your strength, it takes your breath. You'll learn to love the countdown, Horvath told us, and his face suggested he'd never loved anything in his life. It's the only friend you'll get down here. It tells you when to move, when to load, when to clear. He pointed at the recoil zone as if it were a grave marker. Miss it and you lose a limb. Miss it twice and you lose your life. The gun doesn't care about your prayers. It doesn't care who you are. It fires on time. If you're still in the way, we scrape what's left off the deck and promote the next body. He wasn't exaggerating. 3 weeks in, I watched it happen to a man named Petrin, Loader 1 on Assembly 6. Drill fire against simulated targets. The count started. Petrin hesitated half a heartbeat too long. The gun discharged. The recoil assembly slammed back with the force of an industrial press. Afterward, the deck was washed clean. His replacement arrived inside an hour, a terrified lower deck boy who lasted less than a week before heat exhaustion took him. That was the first thing I noticed. How fast people vanished, and how little anyone reacted. Transferred, someone would say. Reassigned. Moved to another battery, but I never saw anyone leave willingly. I never saw a loader promoted up and out. People disappeared and new people arrived, and the guns never paused for grief. Mikhail vanished in my 2nd month. He'd been Loader 4, a quiet man from some hard world I never learned the name of. He spoke little, worked like a cogitator, precise, tireless, blank-eyed. One day he was hauling beside me. The next day, he wasn't. A new Loader 4 took his place like a spare part installed into a machine. No one would tell me where Mikhail had gone. When I asked Horvath, he stared at me as if I'd asked what color the warp was. He's gone, he said. Gone where? The word hit like a door sealing shut. Gone. Focus on your count. 10, 9, 8. And I did. Because the countdown starts whether you're ready or not. Because hesitation turns you into a smear and a line in a log. Because if you want to stay alive down there, you learn not to chase questions you can't afford. So I counted. I lifted. I carried. I tried not to think about Horvath's ruined hands, or why every crew member coughed the same dry rasp, or why a Medicaid officer walked the deck once a week with a data slate and an augmetic scanner built into his wrist, taking readings, making notes, never speaking to us. Heat was the second law of our world. Macro cannons throw off incredible thermal energy. Barrels that could sear flesh on contact. Breech housings that radiated like furnaces. Even the shells warmed in your arms, drawn from magazines built too close to guns that had been firing for hours. During sustained engagements, with all 5 assemblies running, the deck temperature climbed past 50 degrees. Men collapsed. Boys sobbed. Then they got dragged aside and the cycle continued around them. We drank water that tasted like old metal from containers that were never truly clean. Sometimes we poured it over our heads in the 2 or 3 seconds between loads and pretended it helped. I lost 15 kilos my first month. The work ate me from the inside. Fat first, then muscle, until my body felt like it was burning itself as fuel. We were issued protein bars that tasted like chemical paste and supplements meant to prevent deficiency. Mostly, they just made your urine turn strange colors. The Navy rationed by usefulness. Engineers ate better than gunners. Gunners ate better than we did. Command ate better than everyone. We got enough to keep moving, nothing more. Jens used to laugh about it. Dark humor, sharp eyes. He was loader too when I started. Lean, tattooed, "The Emperor Protects," inked in Gothic script along his forearm. "We're not crew," he'd say during rare quiet minutes. "We're ammunition components. They load us into the battery same as they load shells. We're just material being consumed by the ship." I thought he was performing for the darkness. Then I started paying attention. The Medicae officer's rounds weren't random. Every 7 days, like clockwork, he walked the deck and scanned each crew member. He paused longer over certain people. He wrote more notes. Those people usually vanished within a week or 2. I mentioned it to Jens once, during a rest period when we sat far enough from the guns to hear each other without shouting. We drank rust-tasting water and stared at the deck like it might answer us. "You're overthinking," he said. But his eyes didn't agree. "People get reassigned. It's normal." "Where?" I asked. "Have you ever seen anyone actually leave the gun deck and go somewhere else?" He stayed quiet a long time. "No," he admitted at last. "But I've seen what happens to people who ask too many questions. They get reassigned." He gave a thin smile. "Yeah, just faster." So I stopped asking out loud. But I kept counting, not just the firing count. I counted bodies, I counted faces, I counted how many loaders cycled through our battery. In my first 3 months, 17 loaders came and went across 5 crews. Some lasted weeks, some lasted days. One boy, fresh from a schola, eyes bright with whatever dreams they sell kids up there, lasted 4 hours before his heart simply stopped. They carried him away. Before the body reached the med deck, another loader had taken his place. The turnover should have terrified me. Instead, it became background. Like everything becomes background when it's all you have. Death, disappearance. Routine. Heat. Routine. Blood inside your gloves where the shell grips tore your hands. Routine. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire. The countdown became a kind of prayer. My path was always the same, 15 meters from magazine feed to cradle over a deck so hot it could soften boot soles. Lift with your legs, not your back. First rule, and the first one most men broke when panic and time pressed in. Carry. Set the shell into the cradle's steel framework. Align with loader 2, precision that became instinct. Then loader 1 locked the breech, turning the massive wheel until the captain signaled ready. Then 10 seconds to clear the recoil lane. 10 seconds to set for the next load. 10 seconds while the machine spirit, or whatever cold logic drives these weapons, prepared to throw violence across the void. People ask what a macro cannon sounds like. It isn't a bang. It isn't an explosion. Those words are too small. It's a pressure wave that hits your entire body at once, a force you feel in your bones and teeth and organs. The first time it fired over my head, I wet myself. The 100th time, I barely flinched. By the 1000th, it was simply part of the air, another constant like heat and oil and the taste of propellant. And still, it changed us. My palms grew thick with callus. Then the callus split. Then it scarred over into numb tissue. I lost sensation in parts of my fingers. My hearing faded even with protective plugs. Too much power, too often. I developed the cough. That dry, rasping sound every gun deck crew shares until we all sound like we're dying even when we're still standing. My body reshaped itself around the job. Back and shoulders overbuilt, grotesque with strength, while the rest of me hollowed out. We all started to look the same. Massive upper bodies, thin legs, hands like clubs, faces carved down by dehydration and lack of sleep. Specialized tools, optimized for one purpose, discarded when we cracked. Jens vanished in my 5th month. One day he was beside me, helping align a shell, muttering jokes about the little prayers someone had scratched into the barrel. The Emperor protects. And below it, in smaller letters, something like penetrator cores. Work faster. The next day, he was gone. A new loader. 2 stood in his place. A woman named Kira transferred from another battery. She didn't talk. She didn't joke. She worked with grim precision and eyes that looked past the bulkheads, as if she'd already left us in her head. I asked Horvath where Jens had gone. Gone, he said, the same as always. Then he leaned close enough that I smelled oil and burned breath, and his ruined hand clamped my shoulder with shocking strength. "You want to join him?" he whispered. "Because I can arrange that." His grip tightened just enough to make the meaning clear. "You do your job. You count, you load, you survive, or you don't, but you do not ask questions. Understand?" I understood. Understanding didn't stop me from noticing what the Medici officer was really doing. The longest scans, the most detailed notes, they weren't for the healthiest men. They were for the ones who looked the worst, the ones whose hands were scar tissue, the ones who couldn't hear orders unless you shouted, the ones whose bodies had been reshaped most completely by the gun deck. They weren't selecting the strong. They were selecting the nearly broken. I realized it in my 6th month, watching a loader named Krennic endure a scan that lasted far too long. 2 weeks later, Krennic vanished. They weren't reassigning us to lighter work. They weren't sending us to recover. They were waiting until we hit a threshold. Then they took us. The first time I got close to an answer was during our first real fleet action. Officially, pirate elements, according to the Vox announcements, but the veterans called them what they were. Chaos Raiders. We'd spent months on patrol routine before that. Practice shots, empty drills, firing into debris, going through motions that still hurt but didn't demand everything. Then the combat klaxon screamed through the ship and Battery Deck 17 shifted into active operations, and the rules changed. In real combat, you don't fire once every 45 seconds because that's optimal. You fire as fast as flesh can move. You push until the crew fails, because if you don't drown the enemy in shells, they do it to you. Horvath's countdown compressed into a blur. Barely human speech. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, tune, fire, 10, 9, 8. We loaded for 11 hours without pause. No breaks, no rest, no proper water, no food, no thought, only the sequence. Lift, carry, align, load, clear. Lift, carry, align, load, clear. The heat climbed until I was certain my brain was cooking inside my skull. The sound became a constant physical presence, a rolling thunder that made the world feel soft and unreal. Men screamed when the shells burned through gloves. On Assembly 7, a loader collapsed and had to be dragged out of the lane while the crew stepped around him and kept feeding the gun. On assembly 4, someone cleared too slow. I heard the impact, even over the firing cycle. I didn't look. I couldn't. My own count was already running, my own shell already in motion, and if I hesitated, I'd be the next absence washed from the deck. The engagement lasted 16 hours. When the ceasefire order finally came, enemy destroyed or driven off, I collapsed where I stood. Not just exhaustion. Something in me simply shut down, muscles locked, vision narrowed. I lay on the deck tasting blood where I'd bitten my tongue and thought, with perfect clarity, this is how I die. But I didn't. Medicaid teams swept in with stimulants and fluids, hauling us back to minimum function. They triaged injuries with cold speed, treat the ones who can return to duty, tag the rest. 3 loaders didn't get treatment. They got body bags. The rest of us got injections that made our hearts hammer and our hands steady. And within 6 hours, we were back at our stations, running post-engagement maintenance like the battle had never happened. That's when I saw it. The Medicaid officer came through during maintenance. This time he wasn't alone. He arrived with the orderlies in sealed aprons and blank faces, carrying clamps and restraints that looked too clean for the gun deck. They didn't stop to speak. They didn't ask permission. They moved with the certainty of people following a procedure that had been written long before any of us were born. They took 5. One of them was Kira, the silent Loader 2 who had replaced Jens. The officer scanned her with the augmetic in his wrist, studied the data for a heartbeat, then gave a small nod. The orderlies stepped in on either side and guided her away. She didn't resist. If anything, she looked lighter, almost relieved, like someone who had been holding her breath for weeks and finally decided to let it go. I made the mistake of tracking them, not openly. I had maintenance tasks that carried me along the same corridors, checking cradle rails, tightening fittings, clearing residue from the feed tracks, but I kept them in sight, always at the edge of my vision. They didn't go upward toward the med decks where the Navy pretends it heals people. They went down, deeper into the ship, toward the engineering guts and the servitor maintenance bays, places the gun deck crew never had reason to enter and every reason to avoid. I followed until the air changed, until the corridor smelled of antiseptic and hot metal instead of oil and propellant. Then I heard the sounds. Not the roar of guns, not the grind of winches. Something else. Mechanical, clinical. The whir of surgical tools, the hiss of pneumatics, the steady, indifferent rhythm of work being done to flesh. I stopped in that corridor, 2 decks below the batteries, and listened. I couldn't see anything from where I stood, but I didn't need to. Some part of me understood with absolute certainty what I was hearing, and in that instant, the question I'd been carrying for months finally died. I knew where Mikhail went. I knew where Jens went. I knew where Kira was going. They weren't making servitors from condemned criminals or vat-grown stock the way the propaganda reels claimed. They were making them from us. From crew whose bodies had been worn down past usefulness. From loaders who couldn't meet minimum efficiency anymore, but still had recoverable components. The Navy was recycling manpower the way it recycled scrap metal, reducing what remained of a person into a tool that could scrub decks, haul cables, turn valves, and never complain. Efficient, economical, perfectly aligned with Imperial doctrine, where function matters and sentiment is a private weakness. It meant the gun deck was never a posting. It was a slope, a gradual slide toward disassembly and repurposing. I went back to work. What else could I do? Report it. To whom? The master of gunnery who set the schedules? The ship's captain who signed off on ration allocations and casualty tallies? This wasn't abuse. This was policy. Cold, correct, authorized. We had been pressed or volunteered into void service and put our marks on documents we barely understood, signing our flesh over to the administratum until death, discharge, or reclamation. So I kept counting. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire. But now, every scan felt like a different countdown. The Medici officer would linger over my hands, my lungs, my spine, tapping notes about degradation and output and, eventually, suitability for reclamation. I wasn't being cared for. I was being evaluated. I was a line on a curve, and the bottom of that curve ended in a servitor bay. My 7th month brought a change. We received a new loader 1, a veteran transferred in from another ship, a man named Greg. He was 40, maybe, and looked twice that. His hands were heavy blocks of scar tissue. His hearing was so ruined he watched mouths more than he listened to voices. Yet he worked with absolute inhuman precision. On his 2nd day, during a rare lull, he sat beside me and spoke as if we'd known each other for years. "You know," he said. Not a question. I nodded. "How long have you been in this battery?" 7 months. He gave a quiet grunt that might have been approval. "Good. Most don't make it to 6 before they figure it out and do something stupid." He drank from a metal cup, and his hands made it look like a child's toy. "I've been loading 9 years, he said. "Started at 17. 4 ships. They move you around when you're getting close." "Close to what?" He gave me a look like I'd stumbled onto a word everyone used but nobody said out loud. "The threshold," he said. "Not just how broken you are. It's output, efficiency ratio. If you stay above minimum performance, you keep your slot. Drop below it, they reclaim you." "Logistics," I stared at him. "How do you stay above it when your body is falling apart?" Greg's mouth twitched into something like a smile. Gaps showed between his teeth. "You learn how the measurements work," he said. "Then you learn how to lie to them." He talked the way a man talks about a trick he's used so long it feels like a rule of nature. Pacing that looks fast but costs less. Lift angles that shift strain away from the parts that are failing. Micro rests, 2 seconds here, 1 second there. Timed between cycles so the gun captain never notices, but your spine does. Ways to steady your breathing when the scanner reads lung function. How to present your hands so the worst of the scarring is hidden in the shadows of your knuckles. "You cheat," he said simply. "You stay just above the line." "And then what?" I asked. His eyes held mine, and for a moment there was something almost gentle there. "It doesn't last forever," he said. "Eventually you degrade too far, but you can buy years if you're clever." "Why bother?" I heard myself ask. "Why stay in this?" Greg's answer came without hesitation. "Because the alternative is servitor conversion," he said. "And I'd rather stay conscious for as long as I can." He watched my face and seemed to recognize what I was still clinging to. "You're young," he said. "You think there's an exit, a transfer request, a medical discharge, a petition. There isn't. Once you sign onto a Voidship, you belong to it until it's done with you." He leaned back against the bulkhead as if settling into an old truth. "So you adapt," he said. "Not by fighting the system, by becoming useful enough that they'd rather keep you working than scrap you." Over the following months, he taught me, not kindly, not gently, just pragmatically, like passing down a trade. How to move so the shell's weight rides your skeleton instead of shredding your muscle. How to lock your breathing into a calm rhythm during scans. How to flex certain muscles at the right moment to make your posture read stable. How to hide pain behind efficiency. It worked. My scores stopped falling. The Medicaid officer still came every week, still scanned, still noted, but his attention shifted from concern to routine. I found the narrow band Greg had described, damaged enough that my body hardened into adaptation, but not so damaged that I dropped into reclamation. Around us, loaders still came and went. Fresh faces arrived, terrified, numb, half-broken already, and then disappeared during maintenance or after a scan ran a second too long. The churn never stopped. In my 8th month alone, our battery burned through a dozen loaders. Some collapsed from heat. Some made mistakes near recoil mechanisms. Some simply failed the metrics and vanished before their bodies could fully quit. But Greg and I stayed. We became the constants, the ones who taught the temporary hands, the ones who kept the count perfect, the experienced pair that kept one gun assembly running at the highest efficiency in the battery. Horvath even commended us once. His ruined voice scraped out praise that would have meant something in another life. On the gun deck, praise only meant one thing. You're still useful. The pattern became my entire existence. Wake, work, count, load, sleep. Repeat. Days blurred into weeks. Weeks became months. The ship crossed the void from patrol to engagement to patrol again, and we fed its weapons like components in a vast machine, becoming more mechanical with every cycle. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire. I stopped thinking about home. Hive Terte, my family, the narrow streets, the greasy air, the life I'd tried to keep, felt like a story someone else told me once. That person believed in dignity, in futures, in choices. He didn't exist anymore. I was Loader 3, defined by function, measured by utility, everything else shed like dead skin. In my 10th month, Greg's luck ran out. It wasn't combat, just drills, routine practice. I saw him falter for a fraction of a second, his grip slipping on a casing, his movement a shade slower than it should have been. He recovered fast enough that an untrained eye might have missed it. Horvath didn't miss it. Neither did I. That night, during a brief rest period, Greg spoke without emotion. "My lower spine," he said. "Something's wrong. Left leg's going numb, spreading." He said it the way you report weather conditions. "I've got maybe 2 weeks before it shows in the numbers," he added. "Can you fake it?" I asked. He stared at his hands, as if seeing them clearly for the first time. "Maybe," he said. "But what's the point?" Then, quieter, almost to himself. 9 years. 9 years of being me. A pause. "It's not enough," I said. Greg gave a small nod. "It never is. But it's what we get." 6 days later, the Medicaid officer took him. I watched Greg walk away between the orderlies without resistance. He maintained perfect efficiency right up until the moment he didn't need to anymore. A new Loader 1 arrived within hours, some scholar boy with smooth hands and bright eyes. He lasted 4 days before heat and exertion broke something vital inside him. After that, I became the senior hand in our crew, the constant, the one who trained the temporary workers, the one who held the count steady while bodies rotated through the grinder. I was 23 and looked 40 and felt 60, and Jens's joke finally stopped being funny. I had become an ammunition component, consumed slowly instead of quickly. Months stacked up, 12, 15, 18. The count continued. My body changed in ways that fascinated the Medicaid officer. He began lingering over my scans again, not because I was failing, but because I was not failing. I hovered right at the edge where maximum damage met minimum acceptable efficiency. A narrow, unnatural equilibrium. I became an outlier. A data point worth studying. How long could a human body sustain this? How far could adaptation be pushed before collapse? I could hear fragments of their technical talk when they brought observers. Degradation rates, efficiency retention, optimization potential. Even survival was service. Even endurance was fuel for Imperial logistics. The second major engagement hit in my 20th month. Another chaos incursion, larger, coordinated. We fired for 36 hours with minimal breaks. Men died. Men were crushed. Hearts failed. The guns never stopped. I never stopped. When it ended, I'd lost so much fluid, my blood thickened. My organs began to fail. They put me on drips to stabilize basic function. I survived again. Because I'd learned Greg's tricks and refined them until my movements approached servitor precision while still remaining human enough to keep my designation. In a horrible way, I was good at it. Good at being consumed slowly. 2 full years, then 3. I became one of the longest-serving loaders in the battery's recorded history. Horvath told me this like it was an honor. The master of gunnery commended me during an inspection. Other loaders looked at me with something like awe, as if there was strength in surviving this long. But I knew the truth. I wasn't surviving through victory. I was surviving through a very specific kind of failure. Failing slowly enough that the system preferred to keep using me rather than replacing me. Damaged goods. Marginally functional. Kept in service because the numbers still barely held. The Medici officer's notes grew longer. He began bringing other officers, then delegations, fleet logistics specialists, administratum analysts, a representative from the Munitorum. They examined me like equipment. During one assessment, I stood bare-chested while they took measurements and samples and performance data. They spoke about my shoulders and hands and lung scarring the way they spoke about barrel wear and recoil tolerances. I wasn't a man. I was a template. My suffering was being formalized into policy, turned into training protocols and thresholds that would be used to push thousands of future loaders harder. I had survived long enough that I was defining what survivable meant. That was the real horror. Not that the system broke me. That it learned from the breaking. That it optimized. That the next generation would be consumed more efficiently because my body had provided better numbers. Part of me, the small part that still remembered being human, wanted to scream, to sabotage, to shatter the pattern. But that part was thin now. Most of me was just the count. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire. 4 years. They gave me a commendation, parchment and seals, and a 3-day rest period. I spent it sleeping in a cramped bunk, my body so conditioned that even in dreams, my hands moved through the loading motions. I knew the end was near. Not because the efficiency line had finally dipped, my scores were still acceptable, but because something else was changing. My mind was hardening in the same way my body had. Thoughts came slower. Emotions felt distant. Everything beyond the next task blurred like a memory from someone else's life. I was becoming a biological servitor without the surgery. Still technically human. Functionally, almost not. And if that transformation completed, if there was no meaningful difference between me and a lobotomized automaton, would the Navy even bother reclaiming me? Would they simply keep me working forever, having achieved through gradual degradation what conversion would have done faster? In the 48th month, the Medicae officer came for me during routine maintenance. I expected the orderlies. I expected the downward corridors. I expected the servitor bays. But they took me up toward the med decks, toward facilities I'd never seen. They put me in a private room, actual privacy, with a door. They gave me a bed that didn't feel like punishment. They treated my injuries with real care, not stimulants meant to force me back onto the line. A specialist examined my lungs, my spine, my hands, with something almost like concern. After 3 days, he said words that didn't fit my world. "You're being discharged," he told me. "Medical separation from active service. Your body's sustained damage beyond what we can reasonably demand." I stared at him, trying to make the sentence connect to reality. "Discharged?" I managed. "Not reclaimed." He frowned, confused. "Servitor conversion?" "No." He showed me documents, official records, scan logs spanning my entire service. The data, the notes, the observations. I'd been tracked like a weapons system. "You maintained function for 4 years, he said. "That's exceptional. That level of endurance has value. Preservation, not reclamation." He said it like he was delivering mercy, like survival had earned me kindness. He didn't understand, didn't want to understand, that this was worse. Servitor conversion would have been a clean end. Consciousness erased, suffering stopped, the last shred of personhood removed quickly. This was being kept alive to testify to my own destruction. This was being preserved as a proof that the system could push a human body to this state and still call it survival. They moved me to a station facility, veteran quarters, adequate rations, light duty assignment, logistics review. Now I sit at a desk. I read data slates. I make recommendations about crew sustainment and training and how to maximize loader output while reducing mortality. As if those goals aren't enemies by nature. As if you can optimize consumption without admitting what it is. And I count. Always. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire. In my sleep. At work. Walking quiet corridors. The rhythm never stops. My hands still mime the weight of shells when my attention drifts. My body tenses at any sound that resembles discharge. I live in a permanent state of preparing for the next load, the next countdown, the next recoil. The Medici staff call it conditioned trauma response. They say it will fade. They're wrong. I'm not really here in these clean quarters. I'm still on Battery Deck 17 starboard, Primary Assembly 4, hauling shells through superheated air, while Horvath counts down and the gun prepares to fire. I'll always be there. That's what years of continuous loading does. It strips away everything that isn't the work, and what remains isn't really human, not in any way that matters. The Administratum wanted testimony for their review, so I'm giving it to them, everything. The heat, the count, the shells, the way bodies break, the way people vanish, where they go. What it means to survive by failing slowly enough that the system prefers continued consumption over discard. They'll read it. They'll extract the useful pieces. They'll revise protocols. They'll push loaders a little harder because my testimony proves it's possible to endure a little more strain. And more men will cycle through gun decks, and more minds will be reduced to number sequences. That is the true horror. Not that we suffered, but that our suffering was productive. That it generated data. That it improved fleet efficiency. That the system doesn't just break people, it studies the breaking, refines it, and breaks the next generation better. I survived. I am evidence that survival is possible. And that evidence will be used to justify doing this to thousands more. Because look, he survived. So it must be survivable. so we can raise the strain until we find the exact point where survival stops. I write this during station night cycle, when corridors are quiet and the lights are dim and I should be sleeping. But the count won't let me. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire. Over and over. Eternal. Sometimes I catch my reflection in polished metal. Hollow face, scarred hands, posture twisted by years of lifting. I don't recognize him. He isn't who I was before the press gangs. He isn't even who I was during service. He's what's left after years of being consumed. The Navy calls me a success story, a survivor, an example of exceptional service. They're right. Exactly right. I did survive. But what survived isn't really me. It's a bundle of conditioned responses wrapped in damaged flesh, capable of pushing paper and reading numbers, but missing whatever made it a person in the first place. Sometimes I think of Mikhail, of Jens, of Greg, of Kira, of the ones who vanished into servitor bays or collapsed under recoil cycles or simply failed the metrics and were removed like faulty parts. Are they better off? Is consciousness without personhood truly better than servitude without consciousness? I don't know. From inside the count, the question feels meaningless. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire. The administratum will take this statement, break it down into actionable intelligence, turn it into policy. And somewhere, on some other void ship, new loaders will haul shells through heat and oil and fumes while counting down from 10. They'll notice patterns. They'll learn what not to say aloud. They'll learn to survive by failing slowly. And the cycle will continue because that's what systems do. They refine. They optimize. They consume. And they call it service. I count in my sleep now. I'll count until I die, however many years that takes. The gun fired years ago, but the sound is still inside my bones, echoing in the spaces where my thoughts used to be. This is life on the gun deck. This is what survival looks like when the machine is designed to use you efficiently instead of quickly. This is what I became, and what they'll use me to make others become. There's no silence deep enough to stop the rhythm, no distance wide enough to outrun it. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire. Always. Forever. Until there's nothing left but numbers and a faint, far memory of what it felt like to be something more than a function. And even that memory is almost gone.